This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
Today on Leap Forward, we're talking to Tony Campbell, CEO of the Motorcycle Industry Association of Great Britain. Tony shares his journey from trainee manager to a leading voice in the motorcycle industry, giving us a deeper understanding of leadership, the changing market, and the need to attract young talent. Whether you're interested in industry mechanics, urban mobility, or future trends in transportation, Tony's insights are invaluable. Let's hear what he has to say. So I'm delighted to welcome to the Bridge Leap Forward series of podcasts, Tony Campbell, who's the CEO of the Motorcycle Industry Association. Tony, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for the invite, Justin. Great to be here.
Really looking forward to this conversation. You've had an incredible career to date. What I thought would be really excellent would be just for you to kind of take me through that journey and how you've landed into the role that you perform today.
Well, interestingly, I left school at 16, as I think a lot of people of my generation did, and went straight into the workplace. And actually, my chosen career path initially was going to be in catering, of all places. I'd been working already from probably the age of about 12, 13 in restaurants. And then I was working for an Italian family that owned 3 restaurants, and I left. They offered a job to me when I left school as a trainee manager. And what did trainee manager really meant? It meant sort of dog's body. You were doing anything and everything apart from the perception of being a manager. And my first boss, who was very inspirational at the time, he said to me, I didn't complain, but I said, look, you know, I remember the first week I turned up with a suit on because I was a trainee manager. And I remember some of the full-time staff there sort of laughing, thinking, you know, why is this guy wearing a suit? And I quickly realised that wearing a suit was not needed. And after a while, I said to my boss, I said, I thought I was meant to be a training manager, learning to be a manager. And he said, well, let me just explain. For you to be a good manager, you need to know everyone's job. Ah, interesting. And that's when I guess the penny dropped. And then I accepted that I wouldn't be doing management things. I'd be doing everything and anything. But I had an interest in food. So it was a great environment. The main restaurant was a dinner dance cabaret. So we had lots of sort of cabaret stars of that period, the likes of Jim Davidson, Freddie Starr, would often the acts that would be there. So of course it was a great environment to be. And that really gave me my bug for being in catering. And then I finished there. We had some family businesses up until the sort of late 80s, wine bars, and that was great fun. And then sort of really very late 80s, early 90s, I always had this fascination. I was big into motorbikes and cars, and I wanted to get into the automotive sector. So a friend of mine was a dealer principal at a Nissan dealership. And he said, look, I think you do really good in car sales. So I started as a car salesman and then quickly progressed to sales management, general management, regional manager. And then eventually in the sort of later 90s, so 1998, because I guess my first passion was bikes more than cars. And I thought, you know what, I'd like to get into the bike industry. And at the time in this country, there were 2 large dealer groups. One was called Carnell Motorcycles and the other one was called Motorcycle City. So one was more northern based, one southern based. So I wrote to both and said, look, interested in joining. I got the Dear John letter from one of the companies, but the other one said, oh, we're looking to expand further south. Come for what we call a group selection day. So I turned up. There must have been 50, 60 people there.
Wow.
And they were all applying for different roles. There was people applying for a general manager's role, which is what I was doing, which was to run one of the stores. And then there was other salespeople, after salespeople. And I got to say, it was an amazing experience because generally speaking, I turned up to, other jobs, you turn up for an interview, get interviewed and you get the job, or you don't. Whereas in this situation, you had to do role playing, you had to do some exercises. They really did say, are you who you say you are? And then at the end of the day, they call it a group selection, because almost like they weeded out the people that weren't going to progress. And by the end of the day, you were sitting down for not quite a final interview, but more or less. And then I got offered the job to run 2 stores that they were about to acquire in London. And that got me into the bike industry.
Wow.
And what was interesting was actually they were fairly advanced as a business, in terms of they had a very structured approach towards training, development, sales process. So it was actually, I would say, on par with the car sector at the time, even though the bike sector more broadly was behind the curve. So I started there as a GM, and then I became like a regional general manager, running several stores. And then eventually I was with that business until 2003, where when we'd been bought out, we were bought out by a large dealer group, automotive dealer group, who then subsequently were bought out by the Royal Bank of Scotland. And they wanted really just the car business. So there was 75 car dealerships. And there was 28 motorcycle dealerships, and I was the operations director. And they decided they wanted to sell or close what they called non-core business.
Yep.
And the core business was the car side. So myself, along with the MD of the of the bike division, and the FD, we were looking at doing an MBO. But unfortunately, the owners of the previous business had basically, to raise capital, they'd floated on the stock exchange, couldn't raise the investment out of the city that they were expecting to. And during that process, all the freehold properties that they owned, they sold, leased back on some leases, which were just not workable for us. So unfortunately, that came to an end. So I ended up pretty much being the last man standing, selling and closing the business. So that was a really interesting experience, from being driven for business results to then being given, at that time, 21 million to sell or close the business. If you can sell or close the business and it not cost us more than 21 million, that's a result. This was an interesting experience. But we had 700 employees. It was a difficult time, because if you're a salesman at heart, you don't give up. And this felt like giving up. But it was a good learning. And then when I came out of the Dixon or the Carnell, it had been rebranded at this point, but I come out of that business, as I said, I was the last man standing. They had you may remember this, the Dixon Motors at the time, which was owned by RBS, had a business called jamjar.com. Very, very early e-commerce car site. And they offered me to stay on to be the MD of that business. But that would be based in Doncaster, and my family were all down in the London area or Essex area. So I said, look, it's not for me. So I was about to rejoin the automotive sector with a previous employer. And then I got a call out of the blue from Piaggio. What you doing? We're looking for somebody. And then I sort of remained in the two-wheeled sector, working for Piaggio Group. Started actually as the sales director for 3-4 months. The chap who was the managing director, who brought me in, then announced that he was leaving. Oh, thanks. But subsequently, I stayed on as the MD designate for a few months before they sort of interviewed me and then gave me the job. And now was the Piaggio MD, Piaggio Group MD, own multitude of brands, Vespa being probably the most famous, but Aprilia, Moto Guzzi, we acquired those, or the group acquired those over a period of time. And I was there for 13 years.
Wow.
Interesting time, both for the business, but also for the industry, because in 2001, so I joined Piaggio in 2004, But in 2001, the market had reached a peak, and we was just starting to see a downturn in the market, which was a big influence on what was going on with the previous business I worked for. So yeah, but I mean, Piaggio at the time had a brilliant position in the market, very well respected, great products. I know you're a Vespa enthusiast or rider yourself previously. And that was it was an interesting job from a point of view. In the early days, you were really given an awful lot of space, so you could be really creative with your campaigns, with your media, with your programs with the dealers. So that was really, you know, a great time. And then over a period of time, really prompted by the credit crunch, I think a lot of companies got super nervous, started to centralize, put a lot more strict controls in. I wouldn't say the job changed. And, you know, when you are running a market, you want freedom to make some decisions. But of course, for all the reasons we all know, there's, you know, whether it's brand positioning or whether it's, you know, you want to run a very, very similar approach to the market in all the markets. And therefore, the free thinking part started to erode after a while. I'm not saying it's wrong. What I'm saying is it's different.
Yeah.
And I sort of felt that, you know, my, how can I put it, freedoms were not as good. You couldn't be as entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. So I was on the board of the MCIA representing Piaggio Group.
Yeah.
And actually I'd become the chairman. The way the process works is we have a manufacturer's chair, there's a vice chair. You start with chairing one of the special member groups, then you become the vice chair of the board, then eventually you have a 2-year term. So I'd been the chair for more or less 2 years. And when I first took the chairmanship, the current chief exec announced that he would be leaving while I was in the chair. So he said, so it's your job that you're going to have to replace me. Right, great. So before anyone thinks, oh, you gave yourself the job, I certainly didn't. Because I actually had no interest in the job, to be fair. Trade association chief execs for me were where people go out to retire. And I was a long way from wanting to do that. So we went through, or we put a working group off the board, a recruitment sort of panel, and we went to market. We had lots of people apply. We went through a process. We used a third party to help us with all of that. And we eventually offered the job to a chap that was leaving the Volkswagen Group. And then after a week or so of me writing to him, offering him the job, he then said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take the job. I'm going to take a job elsewhere. So that put us back to square one. And bearing in mind, we'd been going through this process for a good 6 months.
Right.
So actually, it was my independent director, who you know well, Sarah. She the January board meeting, in fact before Christmas, she said to me, Tony, because as part of that recruitment process, I'd put together how can I put it, a vision for where we saw the industry going, which then shaped the type of chief exec we wanted. And dare I say, I think it was really quite forward thinking. You know, we were in an industry, the motorcycle industry, didn't need to reinvent itself, but we needed to start to think about how the market was going to develop. And MCIA as an organisation was incredibly passive, so doing a good job for the members, but reacting to things rather than trying to force the situation, you know, with government, to really look, you know, try to develop,
drive it forward.
Yeah. And of course, when I put this sort of, how can I put it, I guess, strategic vision together, which we were using as a base to say to budding chief execs that were applying, to say, we want to ask you about these things. What do you think? So of course, then Sarah said to me, look, that's got your name written all over it.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. So I had to do a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
Is this for me? It felt like coming out the fast lane and getting back into the slow lane. But actually, it was the fact that so much change was needed. And I guess different thinking is what really attracted me to the role. So that was in 2017. So here I am, September. It'll be 7 years later. Quite incredible. But yeah, very much enjoying it.
It's a fantastic story. So many different perspectives, and I think anyone listening to this also they realize that career journeys are non-linear, right? And it's just fascinating to think about sort of all of the different perspectives that you've got, that obviously add huge amount of value to the role you're doing now.
Yeah.
So on that basis, then paint a bit of a picture for us on where is the sector in the UK today. Give us the warts and all story.
I will. I mean, if we can just sort of take ourselves back to the 70s.
Super.
So this sector, in terms of market volume, so if you think the automotive sector currently is about 2 million new cars per year in the UK, and currently our sector is around 120,000. So there's a massive difference in terms of scale between the two markets. If you go back to the mid-70s, the automotive sector was much smaller. It was still significantly bigger than our sector. But if you think during that period, you would not get 2, 3, 4 car families as we do today. Most families, if they were lucky, would have 1 car. And often, generally, the male of the household, they'd have a moped or a scooter, often without sort of naming any brands, but Honda famously had a C50, C70, C90, which was like a step-through moped.
Yeah,
most people would describe it as a moped. So when we had Britain was very different in terms of industry, and you had a lot of factory workers. You'd see fleets of these factory workers turning up. And our market at the time was 500,000-600,000 a year.
Wow.
So massively different. As society evolved and cars became much more affordable, suddenly not just the husband would have a car, but the husband and wife would have a car. And suddenly you'd have probably an average of 2 cars per family. And of course, at this point, the preference was, do you need a 2-wheeler or should you have 2 cars, 3 cars? And of course, this was being fed, in terms of, people were, let's be honest with you, it's human nature. You always want nice things and the best things. And therefore it was all very status. It was all, we become very materialistic, whether it was televisions or whether it was cars, owning your own home. It was during this period where the market changed an awful lot. We did have the benefit of Barry Sheen at the time. So Barry Sheen, incredibly popular character. Those of you that are old enough will remember Brute 33, and it was him and James Hunt were the 2 faces of the Brute 33 brand, along with Henry Cooper and some of the, the sports stars at the time. And he was a bit of a cool dude to remember. But what was interesting, I guess motorcyclists at the time were massively motivated by racing. And of course, the Japanese brands had arrived from the early 70s. And motorcycles are becoming incredibly, dare I use the word, sexy, exciting.
Yeah.
And there was, as I said, from a market of 500,000-600,000, there was a real enthusiastic community. However, the need to ride a motorbike for travel was changing very much to riding a motorbike for leisure. Incredibly, if you think mid-70s, 500,000 marketplace, mid-80s, it dropped as low as 50,000.
Wow.
So you can imagine this change in the industry in terms of the scale of the industry. And the reason partially that happened is that the motorcycle enthusiasts, and I'm a good example of this. Okay, so in the early 80s, very early 80s, I was riding bikes to travel around. Then all of a sudden you get married, settle down, have kids. You can't afford a nice motorbike and move the family around, so you end up having to just have a car. And that was pretty much the story during the 80s. And licensing and access to ride a motorbike had become much more difficult. It was much tougher to get a motorcycle license. There was restrictions on performance, and therefore the government had done a good job at making riding a motorbike more difficult, but also less exciting. Mainly driven by, I guess, social nuisance, but also road safety concerns. And if we just sort of fast forward to the early mid-90s, some interesting things happen. My generation, that had fantastic memories of riding motorbikes. The term that was used were born again. And we had this born again biker phenomenon. And in the sort of mid-90s, it was a combination of the manufacturers making incredibly exciting bikes, starting with Suzuki's GSXR, then the Honda Fireblade, Yamaha R1, some bikes that were, when I was younger, I could only dream about.
Yeah.
Suddenly, these were attainable. And we suddenly managed to stimulate people coming really back to the sector, but purely to ride for leisure. So we grew the market again. And we got it up to 2001, we got it up to 174,000, which was the best year. I used the word recent times, it's a long time ago now. And what we also managed to do is the children of those born again bikers, particularly the lads, they were seeing some really exciting scooters, some, funky, fast looking scooters, even though they were power restricted. And we managed to start to get some younger people coming back in. And the scooter market and the small geared motorcycle market was really starting to gain some energy. However, what we didn't manage to do was keep those people engaged.
Right.
Probably down to parental pressure, road safety concerns, and also it had become quite unfashionable to, take your partner out on the back of a motorbike. They want the creature comforts of a car. And going back to that point, cars had become incredibly affordable, particularly with the introduction of PCP. PCP in the early 90s originally started by Ford. They invented PCP, or the Ford Finance. Suddenly, owning a car, even for young people, had become very accessible. So, of course, if you then end up with parents who say, I don't really want you riding a scooter or a motorbike, it's really dangerous, wait 1 year, because you had to be 16 to ride a moped. At 17, you can get a car. Wait 1 year and we'll get you a car. And this is what we were struggling with. So we, as a sector, we done incredibly well at keeping the born again bikers interested, but we were struggling to bring young people in. Then mobile phones have been around for a while, but then you start to see iPhones, you start to see, smartphones, you start to see technology, which is now really engaging young people. So in my day, if I wanted to go and see a friend, you'd either pick the landline and phone them and speak to them, but you didn't do that. You go and meet them.
Yeah.
The need to meet physically has changed also. You can have a social life without actually seeing people, whether it's through social media, whether it's through, I remember my kids, we're going to a house party. What they really meant was they're not leaving their bedroom and there's about 30 people connected on this group call type thing. So the need to travel had changed so much. So part of having a moped as a kid and then motorbikes was all about freedom and getting out and about. And now the need to do that had changed, particularly for young people. As an industry, this is both my opinion, but I believe fact, is that we had lost sight of what the young customer really wanted. When you start to see all these new technologies and innovations, if you are trying to get them to buy something that fundamentally hasn't changed for 20 years, that's going to be challenging.
Yeah.
So I think I know, we've done an incredibly good job at keeping the born again crowd re-engaged. And we've basically followed them on this path from riding sports bikes to then riding big naked bikes to then riding retro, sort of modern retro bikes, and now adventure bikes. Everyone wants to be an adventurer, even though most people don't go adventure riding. But we've kept those people with us. The challenge we're now facing is that the average license holder is mid-late 50s. We're not getting enough young people engaged. Some brands attract more young people, but not in the numbers that we need. So we're at a point as an industry where we need to really start thinking about, first we need to be thinking about urban mobility, which we are, but we need to be better at that. We need to be thinking about what sort of products is going to engage today's young customer. And because the reality is that if we in 5, 6, 10 years time, if we don't start to replace these mid-50s, they're going to start to get to the age where they're going to stop motorcycling. And bearing in mind, they're motorcycling primarily for leisure. The sector's had a bit of an injection with last mile delivery, so your Uber riders, your Just Eat riders. That's riding for business. Are they two-wheel enthusiasts? Probably not. However, what's really interesting is we're starting to see the advent of micro-mobility. So whether it's e-step scooters, whether it's e-bikes, there's plenty of illegal e-bikes out there as well, by the way, which have really replaced mopeds. But it's encouraging to see young people using those products. So all of the things you think, well, nobody wants to ride a motorbike or a scooter because they get wet and cold, but they're doing it on an e-bike or on an e-step scooter. So I think as an industry, we're starting to see an opportunity, and we need to think really carefully about how we take advantage of that opportunity. So I think the market has an amazing potential, not just two-wheel, by the way. So light 3 and 4 wheel. So we're already seeing some interesting products come to the market from some of the automotives, like Citroen with the Trainee. One of our members, Silence, have brought a little nano car to the market. There's a new product that's coming in called Microlino, which one of our importer distributors are going to be distributing in the UK. And some of these products in some of the categories that they sit in, so I won't bore the audience with the categorization, but some of the products can be driven on a moped license. So if you get a moped license, you can then drive one of these little nano cars. So this is interesting, particularly when city authorities want to try to decongest the streets. They want to give more space to cycling and walking, but you still got to move people, you still got to move goods. So our sector has a great future if we get it right in sort of facilitating new emerging markets. So maybe not traditionally motorcycles. I'm not sure that will still exist. But this sector now has an opportunity to get some scale that it's probably not had since the 70s, when I was speaking about everybody riding a moped to get to the factory. So some exciting times, but we absolutely need to be being able to read the future market well, make sure we understand how policies and legislation is going to start to shape that, and make sure we're ready. Because if we're not ready, if it's not the companies that exist today, it will be somebody else. And we saw what Tesla done to the automotive sector. They came along, broke tradition. This is what will happen in most markets. And as I sort of said many times before, we don't want to be the next Kodak. And we don't need to be the next Kodak, but we've just got to be brave. And I think that's the challenge.
Fascinating. Now tell me, what role does the MCIA have in that?
Well, if you think about a trade association, we provide a number of what I would say critical services to our members, whether it's market intelligence, which helps them really plan business, and whether it's just new vehicles, whether it's how many vehicles in the park, what does that look like in terms of how many vehicles in use, test passes, theft data, all sorts of stuff. We provide an awful lot of information to our members. We also own the motorcycle show, which takes place at the NEC in Birmingham every year, and we're really evolving that show. That show is going to become more like an indoor festival of not just motorcycling, but mobility. And we want to have the ability to attract people that don't regard themselves, they're not a motorcyclist now, never probably think about being a motorcyclist, but come to that event and have an amazing day and actually maybe be tempted with what they see. There'll be live entertainment, there'll be lots of things, there'll be a expert lab, so come and learn about stuff. And we're having a couple of days there which are going to be dedicated, and we're going to be working with schools, colleges, universities to get people to come and spend the day with us. So we own that show. So I guess that show is a window of trying to attract a new audience. So we have a role. We have a role to try and both protect but also try and promote the marketplace. But at the same time, we're a trade association. We're not a marketing. We're not the marketing body for the sector. So probably one of the most important role that I think we play, apart from all of these services, regulatory, technical, market intelligence, probably the most important role is working closely and shaping future legislation and policy. Because if you are purely passive, and I think the MCIA was passive previously, if you are passive, you're only ever reacting to something that's going to be a problem, rather than influence what comes out the other side. And what we've done over the last 5-6 years is we've got very much on the front foot, where we are now very much the sounding board for DFT for our sector, for when obviously we're just about to go into a general election, but the government are looking at decarbonisation. They're looking at how can we improve air quality, how can we be more efficient from an energy perspective, how can we clean up things, and we are now being consulted, spoken to, advisor to government, I guess, largely. Of course, we're here to lobby for our members. Sure. We want to make sure there's a healthy, equitable market that the members can perform in. But that can only happen if legislation works for you and you have a government that's in favour of a sector. Now, of course, we have a tricky road safety record for obvious reasons. However, as the transport ecosystem will evolve over the next few years, there's no question, the traffic mix will change, which means that we're already seeing with the cycle superhighways here in London, and we around lots of investment going into active travel all around the country. You will start to see the transport mix change a lot, and this means that will have in my opinion, a very positive impact on road safety. And that means that if when I spoke about as an industry being brave, we need government to be brave. It's all well and good having aspirations around net zero and whatever, and then of course having to then change tack because politically it doesn't look good. If we're serious about changing things, we have to take the audience with us to start with, which is Joe Public, and we have to be brave to make some decisions that necessarily won't be immediately popular, but eventually you'll get people on side. But you gotta oil the wheels to make that happen. And we have if you have a government that's flip-flopping, very indecisive, if that's the word, indecisive, then that's not going to help anyone. And what we need to do is we need a government that has some very, very clear policies, stick to those policies, work with a realistic timeline, and then encourage industry. Industry will innovate. I think the biggest challenge we've got is that government historically have said, this is what the end game looks like. No, what they should do is tell us what they want to achieve and let industry innovate and find ways to do it, not dictate what the technology should look like. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. So sorry, to answer your question, in terms of MCIA, our role is to make sure that our members are informed, they're provided all of those key services, and we create a political legal landscape that allows our members' businesses to flourish. And that's the most important thing, that we can do.
Really fascinating. And you've performed so many different roles in this industry, and as I said, therefore have so many different perspectives. You've talked there around change. You've talked around sort of innovation, and I suppose there is a step perhaps beyond inform, which is educate.
Yes.
Somewhat. Give me your perspective on what that sort of education and kind of principle or pillar means to you, in this industry.
Well, the one thing I know, being a fairly old fart, is that we need to work much harder as an industry and as a sector to attract young people to make career choices and think about our sector as somewhere to go and carve out their career. I mean, you think about some of the brands that work in this industry, which I know young people will look at and go, wow, BMW, wow, Honda, Yamaha, Valentino Rossi, MotoGP. I mean, if you want to work in an exciting industry, this is the place to come and work. And we really need to do better at attracting young talent that can really bring all those ideas that this sector desperately needs. So I think there is some really, how can I put it, green ground for young people to consider our industry as somewhere to come and carve out a career. And, will they be listened to? 100%. I think because when I sit with my board and we talk about how can we get young people engaged, we're the problem. Because we think that people should like what we like. It's very easy when you're passionate about something to say everybody should enjoy doing this, but they don't. So we need to understand why. So you can go out and you can do some expensive market research and whatever. The best thing you can do, one of my old bosses said to me many years ago, he said, if you want to know anything about your business, and in this context, the industry, speak to your customer and speak to your staff. Now, we speak to our customers. We know what they want because we're very good at giving them what they want. And if we're only going to speak to our staff, we might as well just speak to our customers, because typically people that work in our sector are of the similar generation. Okay, so we now need to think about what young people we're going to bring in. Now, one of the mistakes we make is that we bring young people in, or young people come to us, those small numbers of people that are actually, for some reason, passionate about motorcycle or motorcycling. We don't need that. You're just going to tell us what we already know.
You're preaching to the converted, aren't you?
So we need people to think about this industry actually have got no connection or no passion. They maybe got passion in other things. Certainly got a passion for life. And we need people that are, how can I put it, not too safe in the way they think. We need people that are going to be, really...
You used the word brave earlier.
Yes, absolutely. Be brave, be energetic. And they're the sort of people that we need to attract in. Of course, there's a myriad of roles, whether it be with manufacturers, UK-based manufacturers, whether it's on the retail side, whether it's in dealerships. But, lots of opportunities in marketing, comms, tech. Technology is in our sector. And at this moment, when we're thinking about powertrains and new technology, whether it's electrification or whether it's other types of fuels, there's going to be lots of exciting stuff happening over the next few years. So I guess my message is to any young people that are going to watch this podcast is, please think about this sector. If you want to typically get up on a Monday morning, in fact, look forward to Monday morning on a Friday evening, this is the industry to get into.
I'm really glad we're talking about this sort of kind of opportunity, I guess, in the sector. And you've sort of prompted me really nicely there with the sort of painting a bit of a picture of the different types of roles that exist. And give me a bit more color to that. Tell me a little bit more about the breadth and depth of kind of, what you can do in this industry. And particularly, I think, your points around sort of, the new technologies that are emerging, whether it's sort of AI and EV and so forth.
Yeah, well, all of those things exist. As I said, we have some household name manufacturers that operate in this market. We have obviously Triumph being the most obvious, Norton, which is making a big comeback. We've got CCM, we've got Maving, which is a new start business, a couple of young guys who believe, weirdly enough, keen motorcyclists that saw an opportunity with EV in our sector and have come up with some amazing design products. Incredibly, how can I put it, do the job they need to do, but look cool at the same time. So in terms of the types of roles, there's roles in engineering, there's roles in IT, there's roles in, technology, whether it's AI, whether it's, working, in software and, there's lots of opportunities. The mechanical element. So let's think about a combustion engine, which, by the way, is still incredibly relevant and part of the passion of motorcycling. Some of the technologies now and the software and systems that run that technology, they're almost, as we see in Formula One, becoming secondary to the performance, the vehicle performance. And we're very much seeing that in our sector. So there's opportunities to work, as I said, at manufacturer level, in whether it's marketing, sales, creative side, branding, a whole myriad. And then, of course, if you're not based near, or you don't think that, you'd like to, move up to Hinckley where Triumph are, or any of the other manufacturers for that matter, then clearly there is on the retail side. And on the retail side, obviously working in a retail dealership environment, I've got to say, most of my best memories in my working career has been from that environment. Fantastically social, meeting customers that, that are incredibly interesting. And as I say, those environments are becoming forever more, I use the word complex. Complex is not the right word, but interesting, where they're starting to use more technology, the experience of selling a product, an exciting product to start with, is now having to be dramatized in a retail environment that's also, if you look at what, you walk into an Apple store, it's an interesting experience in terms of, you're buying a device, but you're getting an experience while you're there. And it's no different in our sector. You're getting a full immersion. Why are you, to work? It's incredible, actually. Whenever I've worked with any brands, I become a very loyal advocate of that brand immediately, because you start to quickly learn about the history of that brand and the heritage and why it's where it is today and what it's representing for the future. So if you want a connection, and I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, a sense of purpose with your career, this is not a boring office job. Far from it. Whether you're working in R&D, or you're working in a marketing department within a manufacturer, or whether you're working in a dealership, there's one thing: is you will very, very rarely go home and go, I've had a boring day. A boring day does not exist. Hard work exists, but boring doesn't exist. And you'll have a real sense of achievement.
And as a leader, what are the skills that you really look for, to succeed in this sector?
I want to be really careful what I want to say. Beyond any degree, beyond any qualifications, educational qualifications, it's about the right character. In fact, I part of one of my previous companies where I was, we would I mean, it's not done so much, I don't think, anymore, but we would psychometric profile every applicant, and they had to have a certain set of parameters in terms of character traits, because everything else is trainable. Very difficult to train behaviors and character. And that character that's really important is somebody that has drive, ambition, energy, a positive mental attitude, enthusiasm. These are the basic ingredients. And in fact, when I used to run one of the stores here in London, I took on a young lad that had a really troubled background, been in trouble a bit.
Yep.
Didn't quite find himself in a prison, but weren't far. A real young scallywag, let's put it that way. And he now owns and runs a very successful business in Wales, and he started with me as a parts person, but just all of the right ingredients that just needed leading in the right direction. And therefore, I think if you join this industry with that attitude and that mindset, the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question, because I think in any industry you need those characters. So if you think you get somebody incredibly positive, enthusiastic, willing to learn, all of those basic character traits, you can go on and be successful. And this interesting thing, there's obviously I want to change the subject slightly.
Mm-hmm.
When I see what's going on in terms of diversity, equality, inclusion, this whole agenda,
Mm-hmm.
when I turn around and say to people, actually, in the motorcycle industry, those things exist as a default. And I'll tell you why I say that. When I got back into motorcycling after that break during the 80s, and married, kids, etc., and I got my first bike again, which I think was 89, I used to go to a bike, you go to a bike meet somewhere, could be a tee out in the middle of a forest or whatever, and in my case it was a high beach in Epping Forest. And I'd turn up there and there'd be a whole mix of people, both in terms of professional backgrounds, both in terms of what families they've come from, communities they come from. So there'd be people there from all walks of life,
yeah.
And both male and female. And the one thing, you had a passion and an interest in motorcycling. I don't care anything else about who you are. There's no class difference. So in my gang of mates, there was a guy there who was a dustman, as we used to call him. There'd be somebody that worked for a large Japanese corporation. There'd be somebody that worked in the banking sector. There'd be somebody that was painter and decorator. There'd be all different walks of life, but none of that made any difference. And that also extended to, race, background, gender.
Yeah.
And in the motorcycling community, I can guarantee you now, there is absolutely no attitude towards, excluding anybody. So when you already have that as a culture, you don't need to make any effort to be inclusive, to be diverse. And we have a lot of very successful women in our sector. We have mixture of, in the workplace, a real diversity, but natural. We haven't needed to go out and make a particular effort to do that, because almost when some industries had to do that for the right reasons, actually we were already there, and it was already part of our DNA. So that's sort of interesting. So anybody that would think that this is quite a male-dominated, unfortunately, it is still too male-dominated. And I think that's because any young people that want to come into the sector maybe think that they wouldn't be welcome or wouldn't have an opportunity. But that couldn't be further from the truth.
Okay.
In fact, one of the most successful British superbike team owners is a lady.
Proof in the pudding.
Yeah.
So, crystal ball, 5 years' time, what does this industry look like?
I think we're going to be faced with a lot of challenges.
Yep.
There's no question. I've spoken about the market already. I think we'll start to see a lot more innovation in terms of technology, new products. I think we'll see more than just two wheels. There's no question. I mentioned earlier on about some of the new products that are already coming onto the market. And I think we'll start to see if government get, legislation and regulation right, I think we'll see the sector really flourish. And I think we will start to play a much bigger role with urban and suburban mobility. I think this is the reality. This is what we will see. There are certain things that need to be put in place for that to be fully realised. The action plan that we published in 2022, which was a joint government industry action plan, as long as that's continuing to be progressed, then I think the outcome will look really, really positive for us.
That's tremendously exciting. And lastly, someone's listening to this, watching this. What's the one piece of advice you'd give someone considering entering this industry?
Difficult to say one piece of advice. I want to be careful. Bearing in mind, I've got 4 daughters.
Yep.
2 are in their mid-30s and 2 that are now in their later teens. One's just finishing her exams. And the one thing I drill into my kids is just, follow your dreams without question, but just be prepared to work hard. Please do not think, whether it's a university degree or whether it's some sort of diploma, that gives you a God-given right to get on in life. This is the start, not the end of your journey. So just be prepared to work hard, listen and learn, and just be committed, and you'll succeed.
Thank you for your time today.
No problem. Nice to see you again, Justin. Thank you.